this video tutorial, we are going to be having a look at solving monic and non-monic quadratic equations using technology. The technology that we're going to be utilizing in this video is the Casio FXCG50 graphics calculator. Before we get into using our graphics calculator to solve our quadratic equations, we're just going to have a quick reminder of our quadratic equation general form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, we need to be very familiar with this general form to help us solve our quadratic equations using technology, as we need to be able to identify our a, b, and c constant variables before we can enter it into our technology to help us. We also need to be able to competently and confidently rearrange our various quadratic equations into this form in order to then also identify these a, b, and c variables. So let's have a look at our first set of examples. We've been given the monic quadratic of x squared minus 13x plus 42 equals 0. Now we can see that it is already written in the general form of our equation. So we can go ahead and identify our a, b, and c values. We can see that there is currently no coefficient in front of our x squared, so our a value will be 1, as this is a monic quadratic. The value in front of our b is negative 13, making sure that we include the sign in front of our coefficients when identifying our a, b, and c values. And finally, our c is going to be positive 42. Once we've identified these three coefficients, we can go over to our graphics calculator to solve. Now we are going to be using this equation function here. And once we enter into the equation function, it's going to ask us to select what type of equation we want to solve. We're going to press F2 because we are trying to solve a polynomial. And our polynomial, or our quadratic in this case, is going to be to the degree of 2. You will see that we are given the opportunity to enter in an a, b, and c value in the calculator. So we're going to go ahead and enter in the three values that we identified earlier from our equation. Once we have entered in those three values, making sure that we have the correct signs for each of the values, we're going to press F1 for solve. So we have given two x values, so this particular quadratic has two solutions. So I can write as my solution, therefore, x equals 7 and x equals 6. Now, not all of our quadratic equations are going to have a, b, and c value for us to identify, such as our second example here. But we can see that we've been given information for our ax squared and information for our bx. So we can go ahead and identify an a value of 1 and a b value of negative 3 for this equation. Now when we're putting this into our graphics calculator, we simply leave the value of the coefficient, in this case c, as the number 0, and it will still be able to solve for us without needing that third coefficient value. So we can solve here. We can see again we have two solutions for the value of x. So we can have x equals 3 or x equals 0. We're going to have a look at a second example whereby we haven't been given all three variables for our coefficients. But we can see again here we've been given information for our ax squared and information for our c. So we can identify in this particular equation that our a value is 3 and our c value is negative 27. As with the previous example, we're just going to leave our missing coefficient as 0. In this case, our b will be 0 and our c value is going to be negative 27. Again, we can solve this and we can see that we have two solutions for x being 3 and negative 3. Now we may also come across scenarios whereby our equations are not yet in our general form. So we will need to rearrange them in order to get it to this general form. So in this case, we can see that we have 36x squared, take 21x on the left-hand side, and we have the constant 2 on the right-hand side. So I want one side of my equation to equal 0. I'm going to choose the right-hand side, so I need to subtract both sides by 2 in order to get this to its general form. So I end up with 36x squared minus 21x, take 2, equals 0. Now, even though we have ended up with a non-monic equation, we don't need to do any further manipulation to this quadratic. We can just go ahead and identify our a value of 36, our b value of negative 21, and our c value of negative 2, and go ahead and put it into our graphics calculator. So we'll put in 36, negative 21, negative 2, solve, and we can see that we have 2x solutions. Now we can see here we have x equals 0.6666. If you go and highlight your cursor over the decimal, you will see that it also will represent it in fraction form for you. This can sometimes be nicer to have as your final answer, and it can also lead your answer to be more accurate overall if you are then continuing to use it in certain situations, rather than having to round the decimal and lose some of that accuracy. Now, second x value is going to be negative 1 over 12. Now, to finish off this video tutorial, we're going to have a look at some examples of equations where we do need to do a bit of rearranging before it's expressed in its general form, and we can therefore use technology to solve the possible solution or solutions for x. Now, there isn't necessarily a particular strategy you should or shouldn't use when rearranging these equations. However, I personally like to make sure that my ax squared value is a positive, but that's just a personal preference of mine. I can see I already, for this first equation, have 10x squared on the left-hand side, so I'm going to leave that there and take my two terms from the right-hand side and move them over to the left. So I'm going to start off by moving this 9x by subtracting both sides by 9x. So I'll have 10x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals negative 1. And then I'm also going to take this negative 1 across to the left-hand side by adding 1 to both sides of the equation. So I'll end up with a final equation of 10x squared plus 2x plus 4 equals 0. Now that we are in our general form, we can go ahead and identify our a value of 10, our b value of 2, and our c value of 4. Let's go over to our graphics calculator and type those three values in. Press solve. And we can see that this particular equation actually has no real roots. So that means that therefore there is no solution. Now remember, it's perfectly fine if you end up with a quadratic equation that has no solution, because if you recall from your earlier learnings about quadratic equations, we can have 1, 2, or no solutions. So this is not an error on your part or the calculator's part. There's just some quadratics without solutions. Let's have a look at one last equation. Again, we can see we have values on both sides of the equation. So we want to get this into our general form. I'm going to go straight away and have a look at my x squared values. I can see I have 2x squared on the left-hand side and 10x squared on the right-hand side. And again, just due to personal preference, I'm going to start off by subtracting 2x squared from both sides. So I'll end up with 4x on my left-hand side and 8x squared plus 3 on my right-hand side. I'm then going to finish off the rearranging by subtracting 4x by both sides. So I have 0 equals 8x squared, take 4x plus 3. Now I know previously you've seen majority of your quadratic equations with the 0 on the right hand side of the equation, but the 0 can be on the left hand side as well. It does not matter, and we can still identify our a value of 8, our b value of -4, and our c value of 3, regardless of which side of the equation our general form is on. So let's go ahead, put these 3 values into our graphics calculator, solve, and we can see that this particular one has no real solution as well, which is completely fine because this tutorial is all about those graphics calculator skills. So whenever you are in a situation in the future and you're solving quadratic equations, and you have the opportunity to access your graphics calculator, it can be an incredibly beneficial tool to either check your manual calculations when solving a quadratic equation, or it can be used to speed up possibly a larger question where solving is just a small part of it.